The universe, as it turned out, was a remarkably bureaucratic place. Oh sure, there were the black holes and the supernovas and the occasional interdimensional rift that threatened to unravel the fabric of space-time itself. But mostly, it was paperwork. Forms in triplicate, safety regulations that could fill entire planetary databases, and insurance premiums that made homeowners' policies on Earth look like pocket change. Humanity's introduction to this grand cosmic administrative nightmare had been, to put it mildly, awkward. See, the Galactic Consortium had very specific classifications for worlds based on their habitability, danger levels, and general likelihood of producing nightmares that would traumatize perfectly innocent alien species. These classifications ranged from Class Y, which were basically paradise planets where the most dangerous thing you might encounter was a slightly aggressive pollinator, all the way up to Class 13, which were designated as Deathworlds. Places where evolution had apparently woken up one morning and chosen violence as its core design philosophy. Earth was a Class 13, not borderline Class Ago, not technically Tuano, but really more of a strong Ano. No, Earth was solidly, undeniably, spectacularly Class Lano. The kind of place where the atmosphere itself was mildly corrosive to 70% of known species, where the dominant predators hunted in packs with terrifying coordination, where the weather could kill you in 6 different ways before breakfast, and where the local sapient species thought nothing of diving into massive bodies of water, filled with creatures that had teeth like serrated knives, just for fun, for recreation. Because apparently humans found near-death experiences relaxing. The Consortium had spent 3 full standard cycles debating whether to even establish contact. Eventually, they decided that any species crazy enough to survive on such a world deserved at least a conversation, if only to understand what kind of collective psychosis had developed. That conversation had led to trade agreements, which had led to cultural exchanges, which had led to the current situation where humans were actually allowed to work on consortium stations, provided everyone followed the human handling guidelines. These guidelines were approximately 900 pages long. They covered everything from appropriate proximity distances, minimum 2 meters, preferably 5, to approved topics of conversation. Weather was fine, anything involving Earth fauna was forbidden, to emergency protocols in case a human exhibited what the guidelines called Deathworld reflexes. This last category included such terrifying behaviors as moving quickly, raising voice above conversational volume, and making sustained eye contact. Most species read the first 50 pages of the guidelines, felt their various biological fear responses kick in, and decided that the safest course of action was to simply avoid humans entirely. Orbital Station Kepler-7 floated in high orbit around Proxima Tertius, a pleasant Class 3 world where the most exciting thing that had ever happened was a mild pollen bloom in the southern continent. The station served as a diplomatic hub, a neutral ground where hundreds of species could meet, trade, negotiate treaties, and generally pretend that the vast cultural and biological differences between them weren't occasionally hilarious and frequently problematic. It was a marvel of engineering, a spinning wheel of metal and composite materials nearly 6 kilometers in diameter, with docking ports for every conceivable type of vessel and environmental zones calibrated for species ranging from methane breathers to beings of pure energy who technically didn't need physical space, but appreciated the gesture. It was also, as of 6 months ago, home to exactly 1 human security contractor. Raina Kovac had not grown up dreaming of working in space. She'd grown up in Belgrade, gone to university in Munich, spent 5 years doing private security work in Lagos, and generally lived a perfectly normal life by Earth standards, which meant a life that would have given most consortium citizens a nervous breakdown. She'd taken the off-world contract because it paid obscenely well, because she was good at her job, and because after a decade of dealing with human criminals who at least had the decency to be predictable, she figured aliens couldn't be that different. She'd been right. Sentient beings were sentient beings, whether they had 2 legs or 7 tentacles. They lied. They schemed. They tried to sneak contraband past checkpoints, and they occasionally started fights in bars over matters of honor or commerce or romantic entanglements. The main difference was that when Reyna showed up to break up those fights, the participants usually fled in terror rather than escalating, which honestly made her job significantly easier. The downside was that walking through the station felt like being a shark in an aquarium. People noticed her. They moved. They found other corridors to walk down, other lifts to take, other entire sections of the station to conduct their business in. She'd tried smiling to seem more approachable, but apparently humans showing teeth was universally interpreted as a threat display, so that hadn't helped. After 6 months, Reyna had made peace with her reputation. She was the Deathworlder, the human, that one. She did her job, she stayed professional, and she tried very hard not to think about the fact that her mere presence violated approximately 40 regulations that the station administration had quietly agreed to ignore because, well, someone had to handle security, and humans were apparently very good at the whole controlled application of force thing. It was 14-hour station time when Reyna decided she'd earned a break. Her shift had started at 6:00. She'd already broken up 2 disputes over docking fees, confiscated what appeared to be either exotic spices or recreational narcotics from a Venlian trader who insisted they were the same thing, and spent 90 minutes reviewing security footage of a corridor where absolutely nothing had happened because the station's AI had flagged it as suspicious inactivity. She was tired, she was annoyed, and she wanted coffee. The diplomatic lounge on level 7 was technically restricted to ambassadors and high-ranking officials, but Reyna had learned that nobody questioned her when she went anywhere. Perks of being terrifying. The lounge was a sprawling space with environmental zones for different species requirements, elaborate furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary, and most importantly, a beverage dispensary that could produce something approximating actual Earth coffee. She walked in, nodded to the hexapod attendant who immediately found urgent business in the storage closet, and headed for the dispensary. She set her bag down on a nearby seat, a comfortable-looking thing designed for beings with conventional bilateral symmetry, and punched in her order. The machine whirred and hissed, and Reyna waited, lost in thought about nothing in particular. She didn't notice the 3 aliens in the corner who had been engaged in animated conversation and had suddenly gone very, very quiet. Kixthar was what humans would have described as a mantis-like being, though that comparison would have deeply offended him. He stood nearly 2 meters tall on 4 legs, with another 4 limbs adapted for manipulation and a head that consisted mostly of enormous compound eyes and mandibles that could, in theory, shear through most organic materials. In practice, Kixthar was a scholar, a xenoanthropologist from the Chitrix Collective, and he'd spent the last 3 cycles studying humanity from what he considered a safe distance, which was to say, several parsecs away. His research papers on human violence, human bonding, and human dietary choices had won acclaim in academic circles. He considered himself an expert on Deathworld species. He had never actually met a human in person until he'd arrived on Kepler 7 2 weeks ago. Velm was a Gelatrix, a species whose bodies were primarily composed of a semi-transparent crystalline gel that shifted colors based on emotional state. Velm was currently a nervous shade of purple-green, which in Gelatrix color theory indicated a combination of curiosity and mild greed. He was a merchant, a trader in exotic goods and information. And he'd built his considerable fortune on understanding what people wanted and how to get it for them. He prided himself on his ability to assess value in any situation. He had been trying to assess the value of doing business with humans and kept arriving at the conclusion that the profit margins weren't worth the existential dread. Prox was a reptilian being from Sorex Prime, a species known for their rigid adherence to rules, regulations, and proper procedure. His scales were a bureaucratic gray, his eyes were cold and calculating, and his entire worldview was organized around the principle that laws existed for good reason and should be followed at all times. He was a mid-level administrator in the consortium's diplomatic corps, which meant he spent his days filing reports, reviewing compliance documentation, and trying to make sense of the constant chaos that was interstellar relations. He had personally authored 17 memoranda about the violations inherent in allowing humans on consortium stations and had been overruled by people with higher security clearances who told him, in essence, to shut up and process the paperwork. The three of them had found themselves in conversation because the lounge was crowded, and they'd been forced to share the corner environmental zone that accommodated oxygen breathers with standard temperature preferences. They'd been discussing humanity in the abstract, the way one might discuss a natural disaster or a particularly virulent plague, theoretical and distant. Then the human had walked in. She was tall by most species standards, though apparently average for her kind, with dark hair pulled back in what Kixthar's research identified as a ponytail. And she wore the black and gray uniform of station security with an ease that suggested either complete comfort or complete exhaustion. She moved with what the human handling guidelines called predator efficiency, which meant every motion had purpose, nothing wasted, everything calculated. And she'd set her bag down less than 4 meters from their table. "Is that?" Velm whispered, his gel body rippling with nervousness. "A human container?" "A bag," Kixthar corrected, leaning forward slightly. "Standard carry apparatus. Humans use them to transport personal items." "It's unattended," Prox observed, his voice carrying that particular tone of bureaucratic concern that suggested he was mentally cataloging regulations. Section 4.7 of Station Protocol requires all personal items to remain under direct supervision of their owners. She's in violation. "She's getting coffee," Kixthar said. "This is normal human behavior. They require frequent caffeine intake to maintain baseline cognitive function." They all stared at the bag. It was canvas, worn at the edges, with multiple pockets and zippers. It was scuffed, stained in places with substances none of them wanted to identify, and it bulged ominously, suggesting it was full of objects of various sizes and shapes. "What do you think is in it?" Velm asked, his colors shifting to a curious orange. "Personal effects," Kixthar said. "Humans carry a variety of items for daily use. Based on my research, typically includes communication devices, personal hygiene products, possibly nutritional supplements. Or weapons," Prox added darkly. "Regulation 912 prohibits unregistered weapons on station property. We have no confirmation of this. Bag's contents. It could contain anything." "It's just a bag," Kixthar said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. They continued staring. The bag sat there, innocent and yet somehow menacing, the way objects from Deathworlds often were. On Earth, a simple bag might contain items for comfort and convenience. But Earth was a Class 3 world where the local wildlife included creatures that could kill with venom, with crushing force, with speed, with stealth, with parasitic infection, or simply with being too cute to avoid until it was too late. What did that evolutionary pressure do to the objects humans created? What horrors might be considered daily use items. We should examine it, Velm said suddenly. Both Kixthar and Prox turned to look at him. Absolutely not, Prox said. That would violate at minimum 12 regulations, including privacy laws, property rights, and the Human Handling Guidelines, which explicitly state in Section 7, Subsection 4, Paragraph 9, that under no circumstances should non-essential personnel attempt to handle human belongings without explicit permission and appropriate safety equipment. But think of the research value, Kixthar said. And even he was surprised to hear himself saying it. I've been studying humans theoretically for 3 cycles. This is a chance to examine actual artifacts from Deathworld culture, to understand what they consider necessary for daily function. The academic value is enormous. The academic value of getting killed is 0, Prox pointed out. She's not even looking, Velm said, his gel body now a bright orange of excitement. And I've heard humans carry valuable items sometimes. Portable computing devices, rare minerals in their jewelry, even precious metals in their dental work. We could at least assess the contents. Pure observation. No touching. Observation would still be a violation, Prox said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. They looked at the bag again. The human was still at the dispensary, her back turned, waiting for her beverage. The lounge was crowded enough that they were partially obscured behind an environmental barrier designed for methane breathers. The opportunity was there. Quick look, Kixthar said. For science. For profit assessment, Velm added. This is a terrible idea, Prox said. But he was already standing up. They approached the bag like it was an unexploded munition, which, given their lack of knowledge about its contents, it very well might have been. Kixthar pulled out a small scanning device, the kind xenoanthropologists used for non-invasive analysis of artifacts. Velm extended a pseudopod carefully. Prox stood behind them both, ready to flee, while simultaneously calculating how many regulations they were violating and whether he could claim he was supervising rather than participating. The bag sat there on the seat, innocent and waiting. Scanning now, Kixthar whispered, waving his device over the bag's surface. The device beeped softly, displaying data in shifting colors. Multiple dense objects, various chemical compositions, some metallic elements, organic compounds. What appears to be... Is that a biohazard marker? Open it, Velm said. Are you insane? Prox hissed. We've come this far, Velm argued. And scans can be fooled. Direct observation is the only way to truly assess value. Kixthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been anxiety or excitement, possibly both. His research had prepared him for this moment, he told himself. He understood human culture, human psychology, human artifact construction. This was just a bag, an ordinary Deathworld bag, nothing to fear. He reached out with one manipulator limb and grasped the zipper pull of the main compartment. The zipper moved smoothly, which was somehow more terrifying than if it had stuck. The bag opened like a mouth, revealing its contents, and all 3 aliens leaned forward to look. The first thing they saw was a bottle. Half-empty, clear plastic, filled with a red liquid that seemed to glow with malevolent intent. The label read, "Hot Sauce," in cheerful letters, with an illustration of a small red vegetable that Kixthar's database identified as a capsicum pepper. And below that, in smaller text, "Extreme heat level. Handle with care." That's a chemical weapon. Prox breathed. She's carrying a chemical weapon. It's food flavoring, Kixthar said, but his voice shook slightly. Humans consume capsaicin for enjoyment. It triggers pain receptors in most species, but they've evolved tolerance. They seek it out deliberately. They poison themselves for fun? Velm's entire body turned a shade of gray that indicated profound confusion. That's insane. That's humans, Kixthar said. Next to the hot sauce was a crumpled wrapper from what appeared to be a nutritional bar. The label advertised 30 grams protein and made with real crickets. The illustration showed a cricket, cheerfully offering itself as food. They eat insects, Velm whispered. Arthropods. They consume other organisms from their own evolutionary branch. Technically, humans are vertebrates and insects are arthropods. So it's a different branch, Kixthar corrected, but even he sounded disturbed. Deeper in the bag, nestled among some cloth items that might have been spare clothing, was a multi-tool. Folded closed, it looked innocent enough. But Kixthar's scanner was reading it as having 17 separate blades, 3 different screwdriver heads, a bottle opener, a can opener, scissors, pliers, a wire cutter, and what appeared to be either a saw or a serrated edge designed for cutting through organic materials. That, Prox said, his voice climbing toward panic, violates 42 separate weapons regulations. 42. Just that one item. It contains blades, cutting implements, piercing tools, and leveraging devices that could be used to breach secured containers or apply torque to access points. Unbeknownst to the 3 increasingly horrified aliens, their examination of the bag had not gone unnoticed. Orbital Station Kepler-7 had a very sophisticated security system, powered by an AI that consortium engineers considered at least moderately intelligent, and station security considered an annoying hall monitor. This AI monitored everything that happened on the station, cross-referenced it with thousands of regulations and protocols, and flagged potential problems for organic review. The AI had noticed 3 non-human personnel clustered around an unattended bag belonging to the station's human security contractor. It had noted their use of scanning equipment. It had observed them opening the container. And when the scanner had identified the chemical composition of the hot sauce, the nutritional content of the protein bar, and the multiple blade configurations of the multi-tool, the AI had begun passive monitoring, elevating the situation from curiosity to potential incident. The AI was not yet alarmed, but it was paying attention. Prox was arguing for immediate withdrawal. Every instinct he had, every regulation he'd ever studied, every survival mechanism his species had developed over millions of years of evolution, was screaming at him to move away from the bag and its terrifying contents. But Kixthar and Velm were committed now, caught in that peculiar form of cognitive bias where one has already made a bad decision and the only way forward seems to be doubling down. "There's another pocket," Velm said, pointing with a pseudopod. "Side compartment." "No," Prox said. "Absolutely not. We leave now. We file a report. We let proper authorities handle this." "Your proper authorities," Kixthar pointed out. "Your diplomatic corps." "I file reports about proper authorities," Prox hissed. "I don't actually do anything." But Velm was already reaching for the zipper of the side pocket, his orange color now deepening to red with excitement. The pocket opened. Inside was a small kit, approximately 15 centimeters by 10 centimeters, made of red nylon with a white cross symbol on the front. Kixthar's database identified it immediately. A medical kit, specifically a first aid kit designed for emergency field treatment. They opened it. The contents were horrifying. There were bandages of various sizes, which seemed innocent enough until one considered that they were designed for wounds, which implied that humans regularly experienced injuries that required immediate field dressing. There were small packets of antibiotic ointment, because apparently humans needed to preemptively fight infection, which they expected to encounter with such frequency that they carried countermeasures. There were pain medication tablets, small white pills that promised relief from headaches, muscle pain, and minor injuries. But the truly terrifying items were the needles. Small, sterile packages containing hollow metal needles designed for piercing flesh. Multiple needles. Except if humans anticipated needing to pierce themselves or others with such regularity, that traveling without needles was unthinkable. Biohazard, Prox whispered, his scales turning pale. Those are biohazard implements. Unsterilized handling of those could expose the entire station to Deathworld pathogens. The station AI elevated its monitoring to level 3. Biohazard protocols were serious. It began preparing response subroutines. "Keep going," Velm said, because merchants were often idiots who confused profit with wisdom. They found a lighter next, a simple device designed to create fire. Fire on a space station, where controlled atmosphere was the only thing between hundreds of species and the cold vacuum of space. The lighter was small, metallic, worn from use, suggesting the human used it regularly. "She makes fire," Kixthar said, his voice barely audible. Casually, frequently. Fire-making is so normalized in her species that she carries the capability constantly. The station AI noted the fire-creating device and escalated to level 4 monitoring. Fire suppression systems in the diplomatic lounge moved to standby status. There was also a small cylindrical container of something called chapstick, which the database identified as a lip-coating compound. Its chemical composition included various waxes, oils, and synthetic compounds, none of which were registered with station safety protocols. Unknown chemical compound. Potential toxin. The AI noted it and continued escalating. The hair tie seemed innocent, just an elastic band covered in cloth, until Prox's paranoid bureaucratic mind pointed out that it was a flexible garroting device that could be used to strangle beings with vulnerable necks or to secure objects with surprising tensile strength. "We should stop," Prox said. But his voice was weak, defeated. They'd gone too far into the forbidden knowledge. They had to see it through. "There's another zipper," Kixthar said, pointing with a trembling manipulator limb. "Bottom compartment." This zipper was hidden in the bag's base, easy to miss, probably intended for securing valuable items. The fact that it was hidden made it somehow worse, suggesting that what lay within was too dangerous, too precious, or too horrifying for casual access. Velm opened it. The compartment was smaller than the others, but what it lacked in size it made up for in density of violations. The first item they pulled out was a small canister, approximately the size of a human finger, with a trigger mechanism and a nozzle. The label read, "Pepper Spray, Personal Defense, 10% OC." Kixthar's scanner immediately went wild, reading the chemical composition and cross-referencing it with known weapons databases. The readout was unequivocal. Military-grade chemical weapon, designed to cause immediate incapacitation through sensory overload, specifically targeting eyes and respiratory systems. Effective against most carbon-based life forms. Banned for military use by 73 member species of the consortium under the Chemical Weapons Convention. And this human carried it in her bag. For personal defense. As if living on a Class 13 Deathworld hadn't been sufficient preparation for daily existence. The station AI saw the scanner readout and immediately escalated to level 6. Chemical weapons changed everything. Automated defense protocols initialized. Security drones in the nearest charging stations received activation signals. But the AI had not yet triggered audible alarms. It was still assessing, still gathering data, still determining appropriate response. This was about to change. The next item in the hidden compartment was a flashlight, but not a simple lighting device. This was a tactical flashlight, designed with a reinforced metal body, a strobe function capable of producing disorienting light pulses, and a strike bezel specifically designed to concentrate force into a small area for use as an impact weapon. The scanner identified it as a dual-purpose tool: illumination device and blunt force instrument. Potential blinding weapon, the AI noted. Potential bludgeoning implement. Escalating. There was a carabiner, a simple metal clip designed for attaching items to harnesses or belts. Except the carabiner had keys attached to it. 3 of them, made of hardened metal with serrated edges that could serve as improvised cutting tools or, in a pinch, striking implements. The carabiner itself was rated for loads up to 5,000 kilograms, making it a potential leveraging device or flail weapon if swung on its attachment point. Improvised weapons system, the AI cataloged. Multiple applications, continuing escalation. And finally, at the very bottom of the hidden compartment, they found a USB drive, a small rectangular object, innocuous looking, containing data storage. Unknown data, unscanned. Potentially classified information, potentially malicious code, potentially anything. The station AI, which had been gradually escalating its concern level with each discovery, suddenly reached a critical threshold. The combination of chemical weapons, fire-starting capability, biohazard materials, unregistered blades, and unscanned data storage triggered 7 separate high-priority security protocols simultaneously. The alarms did not gradually increase. They did not build up slowly. They triggered themselves all at once, in a cascading failure of protocol that would later require a full system review and several strongly worded memos about graduated response procedures. The first alarm was weapons detection. A harsh klaxon sound, specific frequency, 3 sharp pulses followed by a sustained tone. Red lights activated along the corridor ceiling, flashing in sync with the sound. The second alarm, triggering less than 2 seconds after the first, was chemical hazard. Different tone, higher pitch, continuous oscillation. Yellow warning lights joined the red ones, creating an amber strobing effect that would have induced seizures in 3 different species if any of them had been looking directly at the lights. The third alarm was fire suppression. The lighter had been in the bag for approximately 90 seconds of exposure time now, long enough for the AI to determine that its proximity to oxygen, flammable materials, and oxygen-dependent life forms constituted an unacceptable risk. Blue lights activated. Suppression systems charged. Halon gas injectors moved to deployment positions. The fourth alarm was medical emergency. The needles, the medications, the bandages, all were cataloged as biohazard materials, and their presence outside of secured medical facilities violated 16 different contamination protocols. Green lights now, flashing in counterpoint to the red, yellow, and blue. Medical response teams received automated summoning signals. The fifth alarm was data security breach. The USB drive, unscanned, unregistered, present in an unmonitored container, represented everything that made AI security systems wake up screaming in the middle of their processing cycles. Purple lights, cybersecurity protocols activating, automated quarantine procedures for all nearby data access points. The sixth alarm was perhaps the most damning: unregistered toolkit. The station AI, having now cataloged the complete contents of the bag's 3 compartments, had determined that the collection of items, taken together, constituted a comprehensive survival and combat kit. The hot sauce could be used as a chemical irritant if weaponized. The multi-tool provided cutting, prying, and striking capability. The medical kit suggested preparation for violent encounters. The lighter enabled fire starting. The pepper spray was obvious. The flashlight was a striking weapon and disorientation device. The carabiner and keys formed an improvised flail. The USB drive could contain anything from classified data to system intrusion software. This was not a personal bag. This was an arsenal. Orange lights joined the rainbow of warning signals. The alarm sound now was a cacophony, 7 different tones overlapping, creating an auditory nightmare that would haunt the dreams of everyone present for cycles to come. And because the station AI was very thorough, very literal, and very concerned with following protocols to their exact specification, it triggered one final alarm. Station-wide lockdown. Emergency bulkheads began closing throughout the diplomatic lounge. Heavy composite doors, each weighing several tons, designed to seal sections of the station in case of hull breach or catastrophic system failure, started sliding into position with a grinding mechanical sound that cut through even the alarm cacophony. These doors could withstand direct weapons fire, explosive decompression, and in at least one case, an angry Corinthian whose mate had been insulted, which was roughly equivalent to fighting off a small tank. The 3 aliens, standing around the open bag like idiots who'd just pulled the pin on every grenade in the armory simultaneously, experienced what psychologists would later term acute existential crisis induced by catastrophic decision-making. Kixthar's compound eyes were so wide that he could see in approximately 315 degrees, which meant he had an excellent view of all the lights, all the closing bulkheads, and all the security drones that were now emerging from charging stations and hovering toward their location with weapons charging. Velm had turned completely transparent, a Gelatrix fear response that made him essentially invisible, except for the faint shimmer of his outer membrane, and the fact that he was still holding a pseudopod near the open bag, which rather gave away his position. Prox had frozen completely, his reptilian biology locking him into a fear response that his ancestors had developed millions of years ago when the best defense against predators was hoping they couldn't detect motion. His scales had turned white. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. If thoughts could make sound, his would have been screaming. Other inhabitants of the diplomatic lounge were responding to the alarms in species-appropriate ways. The hexapod attendant had already vanished into the storage closet and secured the door. A group of Venlian diplomats were evacuating in organized formation, their collective consciousness allowing them to move as a single unit toward the nearest exit. A pair of Quarksian traders were hiding under their table, arguing about whose fault this was. An energy being named Flux was flickering rapidly in what might have been panic or might have been laughter. It was hard to tell with energy beings. And Reyna Kovac was walking back from the coffee dispensary, holding a cup of fresh coffee, watching the chaos unfold with an expression that could only be described as done with everything. She saw the flashing lights. She saw the closing bulkheads. She saw the security drones. She saw the 3 aliens standing around her open bag like they'd just discovered it was full of live grenades. She walked over, stepping around a fleeing diplomat, ducking slightly as a security drone zoomed past overhead, and stopped in front of the 3 frozen aliens. She looked at them, looked at her bag, looked at them again. "You touched my bag," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even particularly angry. It was a statement delivered in a tone of such exhausted, bone-deep weariness that it somehow carried more weight than any shout could have. The tone of someone who'd seen it all, dealt with it all, and had long ago run out of surprise to feel. The 3 aliens couldn't respond. Kixthar's mandibles clicked uselessly. Velm tried to become more transparent. Prox remained frozen, though a small part of his brain was calculating how many regulations they'd violated and whether the total fine would exceed his lifetime earnings. It would, by a factor of 7. The security drones converged on their position, hovering in a defensive formation, weapons charged but not firing, because the AI was sophisticated enough to recognize that the human was the bag's owner and not the threat. One of the drones emitted a querying signal. "Stand down," Reyna said, pulling out her security credentials with her free hand. "My bag, my stuff, all registered. Check my personnel file." The drones hesitated, then scattered to continue monitoring the rest of the lounge. The alarms continued blaring. The bulkheads had stopped closing but hadn't reopened, leaving the lounge segmented into isolated sections. Heavy footsteps announced the arrival of Station Security Chief Krell, an 8-limbed being who looked like someone had crossed a crab with a bear and then made it angry about taxes. Krell had been security chief on Kepler 7 for 12 cycles and had seen everything from bar fights to attempted assassinations to that one incident with the Galatrix delegation and the helium, which we don't talk about. Nothing surprised Krell anymore, except apparently humans carrying what scanners had flagged as a mobile weapons cache. "Kovac," Krell said, his voice a deep rumble that cut through the alarm noise. "Explanation, now." Reyna took a sip of her coffee. Still hot. "Good." She gestured at the bag with her cup. "These 3, she said, indicating the frozen aliens with a nod. "Opened my bag. Triggered every alarm we have. My stuff is all registered in my personnel file, checked by security when I arrived, approved by Station Command. It's not a weapons cache. It's Tuesday." "Tuesday?" Krell repeated. "Standard carry items for a normal day on Earth," Reyna explained with maximum sarcasm. "Let me walk you through it, since apparently we're doing that." She reached into the bag, and all 3 aliens flinched. The security drone swiveled to track her movement. Krell's manipulator limbs tensed. She pulled out the hot sauce bottle. "Food flavoring," she said, holding it up. "It's for taste, flavor, making food less boring. Humans have taste receptors that respond to capsaicin, which is the compound in peppers. We enjoy it. Yes, it would irritate most species. So would citrus, so would garlic. We don't weaponize it, we put it on noodles." She set it down and pulled out the protein bar wrapper. "Snack packaging. Evidence that I ate food earlier. The fact that it contained crickets is irrelevant. Humans eat approximately 2,000 species of insects. It's protein. It's sustainable. It's food." She pulled out the multi-tool next, and everyone tensed. "Standard multi-tool. I use it for opening packages, tightening screws, cutting through tape, and approximately 40 other daily tasks that require tools. Yes, it has blades. No, I'm not planning to stab anyone. I'm planning to open boxes and fix things. That's what tools are for." The medical kit came next. First aid kit. Required equipment for anyone doing security work. Contains bandages because sometimes people get cuts. Contains pain medication because sometimes people get headaches. Contains needles for removing splinters or, in an emergency, administering medication. It's medical equipment. It's not a biohazard. It's basic safety preparation. She held up the lighter. "I light candles sometimes. For ambiance. Because after dealing with this station for 10 hours, I want my quarters to smell like vanilla and not recycled air. Fire making is not an act of terrorism. It's a basic human technology we've had for 50,000 years." The chapstick earned an eye roll. "Lip balm. Station atmosphere is dry. Human lips chap. This prevents that. It's not a chemical weapon, it's basic hygiene. The hair tie got a deadpan stare. I have hair. Sometimes I tie it back. This is the device that accomplishes that. If you're worried I'm going to garrote someone with an elastic band, you have significantly overestimated my patience and significantly underestimated how much paperwork murder generates. The pepper spray made everyone tense again. Personal defense tool. Required equipment for walking alone in certain areas on Earth. Yes, it's a chemical irritant. No, I've never used it. I haven't needed to because apparently my reputation does the work for me.